Hello everyone, I'm Vijay, CSC undergrad. Today I'm going to explain you about the exception handling in Java. First, what is an exception? An exception is an event that disturbs the normal flow of program's execution. It's it is typically occurs when an unexpected condition or error is encountered during runtime. This could be due to various reasons such as invalid input, insufficient resources, file not found, or division by zero. So exception is a conditions which disturb the normal flow of the normal execution of the program. Exception handling is a mechanism in programming languages, including in Java, that allows developer to gracefully handle these unexpected situations. So instead of so when we write the code in an inappropriate way, then the compiler will throw the errors. So as a developer or as a programmer, we have to handle those errors and make users interactive, uh, makes users feel interactive while coding. Instead of allowing programmer to crash or terminate abruptly when an exception occurs, exception handling enables the program to detect, handle, and potentially recover from these errors. So, how can we handle the exceptions? In Java, there are three main keywords which are used to handle these exceptions: try, catch, and finally. So, using these keywords, we can handle the exceptions. So, first uh, try block. So, what is try block? The code that may throw an exception is enclosed within the try block. So, when we have an ambiguity that whether the code will throw error or not, we can put those statements or that code in a try block, so that when an error occurs, instead of throwing the error, that can be handled using this try block and a catch block. If an exception occurs within the try block, it is caught by one of the catch blocks that matches the type of exception. Each catch block handles a specific type of exception. So whenever an exception is encountered in the try block, that exception will be catched by the catch block. And we can also print some messages about the what kind of exception has occurred. And next, finally block. So finally block is an optional block. It is not mandatory to keep the finally block. It is used to execute important code such as closing file streams and releasing resources, regardless of whether an exception occurred or not. The finally block is executed even if an exception is thrown or not caught. So, irrespective of the exception is thrown or if the exception is not thrown, the finally will be executed. So, we use the finally block generally uh, in case of closing the file streams or releasing resources. So when an error occurs, if we don't close the resources, it is not a good programming. So let us go through the code so that you can understand the concept in depth. So this is the code to handle the exception. So uh, this line 9, I have a doubt that whether this there may be chance that this line may throw an exception. Next, I used the number variable and taken the input. Based on the input, if we, for example, if we enter the number 0, then it might throw the exception. So I have a doubt that whether this line may throw exception or not. So that's why I kept this block of code in the try block, so that whenever an exception occurs, the code will run without throwing the errors. If an exception occurred, it will be catched by the catch block. If not, then it go to finally block and it execute the statements that are there in the finally block. So let us execute the program. So enter a number. So we have to enter one number. One run once again. So whenever the input is 0, it is throwing an exception called arithmetic exception. So we handle that exception using the catch block. So let us see what error it will throw if you don't handle the exception. Let us give the input as 0. So here you see that the exception in thread main java.lang.arithmetic exception divide by 0. So if we don't handle these exceptions, the error will be thrown by the compiler. So we have to handle this kind of exception. So so when we have the doubt or ambiguity whether some statements will throw exception or not, then we keep that statements in the try block. So if an exception occurs, it will be catched by the catch block, or else it will go to the finally block. So this is about exception handling. And here you see in the finally block, we used one statement called scanner.close. So is it important to close the resources? Yes, it is important. Why? Because, if you don't close the resources, then when an error occurred, the resource set can't be closed, and there may be data loss or some issues will be occurred. So it is important to close the resources. Keeping these statements in the finally block helps us to close the resources. We know that finally block executes regardless of exception occurs or not. So we put these kind of statements in finally block. I hope you understand this concept. Thank you.